I see some familiar faces here, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know some people for the first time today. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for allowing me to come and speak to you about the work that I do at the Juvenile Court. For many of you, it's probably your first time seeing me, and hopefully you won't see me too often because of something that maybe one of your neighbors or family members or something, issues young people have gotten into. But I'm always open as part of my job to speak to the community and let the community know some of the things that are going on in the county, specifically with the juvenile court. I am the only juvenile court judge in Rockdale County. My position is the only judicial position that is not an elected position in the state of Georgia. So what that means is that my position is one that is an appointed position, and it is a 4-year term. I was appointed by Superior Court Chief Judge David Irwin. In Rockdale County, we have 2 Superior Court judges. So when you have 2 Superior Court judges in your county, the Chief Judge, and usually that's the judge who has been sitting the longest, is the one who makes that appointment, okay? And so my appointment, I started my job September 30th, 2016. I got sworn in with Commissioner Washington, and then I will come up for reappointment in 2020. So I am not here campaigning, and God bless you all that have to do that every 4 years. I think probably the reason why our job is an appointed job is because I get to talk about how many children I locked up and how many children I removed from their parents. And I don't think that that's necessarily something that the community likes to hear about. And it's the ugly side of what's happening every day in our community. So I think that in their wisdom, the legislature probably decided that we needed to be appointed. But I want to talk to you all about what happens in the juvenile court, what I'm in charge of, what type of cases come before me, what different options and dispositions look like, and what the charge is. The juvenile court, the code changed in 2014. And the reason it changed was because there were a lot of concerns about the nature of the punishment that we were inflicting upon our young people. And so the idea is for, you all have probably noticed a push for restorative justice for adults. The idea was that push should also be happening for young people. And so the goal for young people who have committed offenses that as adults will be considered crimes, young people would call those delinquent offenses. The goal is for rehabilitation. So yes, you do have to be accountable for your actions, but the idea is if you're under my jurisdiction, then I should have the ability to work with you to try to put some programs in place, put some structure and supervision in place, and hopefully you'll come out of that rehabilitated. And all of us were young people at one point in our lives, and we just know that our brains are not fully formed. And so the idea that we lock someone up and for 30 days and that's going to be enough to change the behavior is the opposite of what actually happens. What actually happens when you lock young people up for making a mistake, they meet other young people who have made several mistakes. And so not only did they make a mistake, but a lot of times after that period of time, they come out with new friends and new associations. And so, then they bring that back to your community. Certainly young people definitely have to be accountable for the decisions that they've made, and I certainly do that in the juvenile court, but I am here to tell you that I truly believe in restorative justice and rehabilitating our youth. So I'll talk about the delinquent side first, but the easiest way to break down the juvenile court for you is there are 2 different sides. One side would be the side that you look at what would be criminal behavior. Those are delinquent offenses. And then the other side is for young people who have been neglected and abused. So when you think about a child who's coming into foster care, a child whose parent has abandoned them, that's the abused and neglected side. And that's the side that Cheryl was talking about where we have CASA. But I'm going to move back over to the delinquent side. As you can imagine, there are a lot of things that young people do that as adults get on our nerves. Okay, and so before the code changed in 2014, if a young person ran away, someone would file a complaint, they would find the kid, and then they would lock the child up. Okay, or if a young person when I say they, we have 159 counties here in Georgia. Every juvenile judge wasn't doing that, but a lot of them were. And so you would have a young kid who just is not a pleasant person to be around, just very disrespectful, doesn't respect authority, doesn't follow any rules, doesn't stay home when they're supposed to. And so for those young people, the response used to be, well, come and file a complaint, and the judge is going to scare them straight and lock them up. And so those cases now, post 2014 code change, are called CHINS cases, Children in Need of Services. And what happened when the code changed in 2014, it gave us as juvenile court judges guidance that most people would think should be common sense, but believe it or not, it's not common sense, so the law had to be changed so we all knew what to do. For young people who do things that as adults we couldn't get locked up for, those are what CHINS offenses are, okay? So for example, if I were to decide never to go back home, my family may miss me, but when they find me, they're not gonna lock me up for that. If I'm at home and I'm just disrespectful jerk to all my family members, don't clean up after myself, curse everybody out, come and go when I want to, you can't call the police and say, please come and lock her up, she's getting on everyone's nerves. If I come home and it's extremely late, I'm past what would be considered a reasonable curfew, you can't lock me up as an adult for that. So all of those things that fall into those categories of what would be considered status offenses, which means offenses that the only reason that you're in trouble is because you're not an adult for doing them, those are CHINS cases. And so what the code says for those is that the idea is to put services in place for the young people, but those services have to come from resources that we have in our community. And so I have someone on staff who is a mental health clinician, and they meet with the family. Usually it's a family member who files a CHINS complaint, but anyone can file a CHINS complaint. School personnel can file a CHINS complaint. Law enforcement can file a CHINS complaint, but realistically a lot of time those complaints come from the family because they have a young person who they feel is out of control, and they've looked everywhere else and they really need some help from the juvenile court. For those young people, they'll sit down with our mental health clinician, go through an assessment, and the mental health clinician will come up with some recommendations for an informal plan. The family has to be willing to enact those things that are in that plan, and hopefully that child will get on the right track through that. Some of the examples of some of the things that are enacted, for some young people, you'd probably be surprised to know how many young people have experienced extreme trauma in their lives, and the way that they're acting out is the only way that they know how is through behavior that's not becoming of a young person. And so sometimes the intervention looks like therapy. Sometimes the intervention looks like grief counseling. We have a lot of young people in our CHINS programs who have been raised by grandparents and experienced the death of the person who raised them, and then are all of a sudden thrown back into the home of another relative or a parent. And so for young people, sometimes that may be the triggering factor. The other issue may be grief or loss of a friend or an acquaintance. We have a lot of young people who more and more we're seeing our young African American youth who are committing suicide. And so we've got a lot of young people who are dealing with friends who have committed suicide or dealing with depression of their own. And depression manifests a lot differently in young people sometimes than it does even in adults. So for our CHINS kids, the idea is not to lock them up. The idea is to refer them to community-based services to help get them on the right track. For young people who have committed delinquent offenses that are misdemeanor level or felony in nature, those are the young people that would come before me, just like what you would normally see for adult criminal court. What happens is a young person breaks the law and they have a run-in with law enforcement. Law enforcement will have to call the Department of Juvenile Justice because in Rockdale County, we are dependent on Department of Juvenile Justice for all of our supervision and our intake of our youth. So what that means is my court does not have a probation staff in-house. My court does not have an intake staff in-house. So if a young person commits a crime in the community, law enforcement is called. When law enforcement comes out, they have to contact the Department of Juvenile Justice, and the Department of Juvenile Justice will ask a series of questions, and based upon the questions, and those are standard questions, the same ones are asked for every single offense. And the way those questions are answered usually determine whether or not that young person will get locked up right away, or whether or not that young person will just have to come and appear at a walk-in detention hearing at court. The way that is determined is supposed to be not something that is subjective in nature, and that's the reason why the screening tool is there. You'll be happy to know that Rockdale County is a part of the JDAI initiative. That is a nationwide initiative, and JDAI means Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. And so what that means is that we are taking into consideration the appropriate screening tools and factors when we're making determinations as to which young people should be locked up. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And then they will go through the normal process of coming before the court. They would have an arraignment. Every young person has the right to have, the constitutional right to have counsel appointed for them. Most of the young people who come before the court on a delinquent case either are indigent or their parents are not willing or interested in hiring counsel for them. But if the offense is an offense where they could, their due process liberties could be at stake, they have to have an attorney represent them. So the public defender's office has an attorney on staff that handles all of the juvenile delinquent cases for young people who do not have private counsel appointed for them. In addition to the CHINS cases and the delinquent cases, so I talked about misdemeanor cases. Misdemeanors are usually punishable for up to a year. Probation is usually what you see with that, misdemeanors. For felonies, the maximum amount of time for most felonies, and we're not talking about the serious felonies, which would be the more aggravated offenses. For your lower level felonies, the maximum amount of time the code allows me to lock a young person up for is 30 days. Okay? It sounds like a short period of time, but if you imagine being a young person and being out of your home and out of the community for 30 days and the amount of different things that you will encounter in a local YDC, 30 days is very impactful for them. But that is the maximum amount of time for a felony for a young person. For the more serious felonies, they're called designated felonies. The maximum is either 3 years or 5 years in secured detention facility, depending upon what happened. There is also an option for young people who have committed very serious offenses for their cases to be transferred to the Superior Court and for them to be treated as adults. And I'm sure you all have probably seen that in the news where a young person has been tried as an adult for a crime that they've committed. For young people, if the day before you turn 17, if you commit a crime, you are considered an adult in the criminal justice system. So what that means is that those young people will not come before me. There are talks in terms of in the legislature about maybe getting on board with the rest of the country or the majority of the country and raising that age to 18, simply because young people's brains, there's a lot